Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar entitled, Here Comes the Flu Again, What to Do to Prevent and Treat. We have an educational and entertaining session in store for you today. And now, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Sanderoff. Brian, the audience is yours.
Oh, hi, everybody. All right, I think I'm good. I think you guys can hear me speaking now. I really do appreciate that. First of all, thanks, Cheryl. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, and thanks for all the hard work that you do to organize these webinars. So, everybody on, again, thanks for joining. We have got a whole series of these webinars planned coming for the next year and a half, and we hope that this works out to be a nice, interesting way for people to get information. These webinars are for you all to share with people as well. So not only can they be joined live, but they also will be recorded and archived on the website. So you can go back to them and refer to them and refer other people to the information if you think it's useful. So today we're talking about the flu. Of course, here comes the flu again. And you can't, unless you're living under a rock, you can't know that the flu season can't not know that the flu season is coming because of the way that the media plays it out, the way that you will find, all sorts of scare tactics, and your doctors will tell you that you have to do your flu shot and blah blah blah. So we're going to talk about all that today. We're going to talk about whether that stuff really works for you or not, and what to do to help prevent and treat the flu if you do happen to get that. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about what really is it that causes the flu. So I want you to imagine that you're at a party, and there's 100 of you that are at this party, and all 100 of you are exposed to this 101st person that comes in that has the flu. And this person comes in, he says hi to everybody, he shakes hands, he gives hugs, so that everybody that's at this party, all 100 people, including you, are exposed to the flu bug equally. Now, you and I both know that not all people in that party or in that room will end up getting the flu. Let's say half of them do. So 50% get the flu, 50% don't. So what is it that really causes the flu in you as an individual? If you talk to a mathematician and you show them that you've got an equation, and on either side of that equation you have something that's the same, then you strike that thing from the equation. That's the way mathematics works. And I think we can look at it the same way here. If everybody was exposed to the flu equally, the flu bug, and not everybody got the flu, well, is it really that flu bug that starts it? Is it really that flu bug that caused the problem? And my contention would be no, it's not, because every one of us, there's not one person here who won't get exposed to the flu bug during the season. It's not really about exposure. It's about your immune system, and whether your immune system has the ability to fight off that flu bug or not. And so it's important to recognize that. You cannot avoid getting exposed to the flu. And it's really just about your immune system. So why do our immune systems not protect us from the flu or from other things as well? And that really is the key question if you want to understand how to avoid getting the flu and or treat it. So here's the answer. We get or are about to expose ourselves to this 3-month-long sugar and stress party. How does it start? It's going to start with Halloween, of course. And so at this time, we get lots of candy, and we have it in our doors. And, there's a couple things that happens with this. First of all, we always end up with having extra candy, or while we're giving out that candy, to the kids that are coming and knocking on the door, we're, doing the one for you, one for me kind of thing. And also, we try to protect our kids, and so when they come home with that big bag of candy, we don't want them to eat all of it, so, making the sacrifice that we all have to make as parents, what do? We'll eat some of that candy as well. And so that is when this whole sugar and stress party begin. What comes after that? Thanksgiving. And again, huge starchy meal, probably less of exercise, maybe some stress that happens because we got families coming, or we're worried about preparing those dinners and all of that sort of stuff. What happens right after that? Black Friday, more stress, right? Now we're worried about getting to that store at 6 in the morning so we can be, one of the lucky people to get whatever it is that's hot that year. We're worried about getting the proper gifts for all the people in our family, maybe spending money that we don't necessarily have or whatever. Then we get into the holidays, and we'll talk about, Christmas and Hanukkah and all that stuff. And again, more stress, in-laws, meals, staying up late, not getting enough sleep. What comes on the heels of that? Of course, New Year's, another, government-sanctioned or society-sanctioned lack of sleep, eating the wrong foods, drinking alcohol, stress. So this is why we end up getting the flu when we do, because all of this happens in combination with some other factors that I'll talk about in a little bit. So then the question is it really about lifestyle? And yes, it can be about lifestyle. It partly is. We're talking about diet or improper diet. We're talking about lack of exercise. We're talking about lack of sleep. Of course, the other big thing that we're talking about is stress, and all that I just described, big on stress, and I'll just explain real quickly. And we will have a webinar in December specifically about stress, where we'll get into this in much more detail. But the issue with stress is that when you're under stress, initially, if we go back to caveman days, if a saber-toothed tiger jumped in the cave, then certain physiological changes would happen in our bodies. Our blood pressure would go up, our heart rate would go up, blood is shunted from certain organs to certain organs, our blood sugar goes up, and our immune system is actually buoyed by that experience. Our immune system is geared up for that. And that's because the body is making preparations to build and repair from the damage that's going to happen from whatever that stressful event is. And that's, we call that a homeostatic reaction. It's actually the body doing what it's supposed to do to preserve life. But back in caveman days, eventually, if a saber-toothed tiger didn't eat us and end us, then eventually that tiger left the cave and then things came back to normal. But in our lives, that never happens. The saber-toothed tiger never leaves the cave. And because of that, our immune systems, although initially buoyed, actually become burnt out. And so long-term chronic stress, which, genetically we were never geared to handle appropriately, our immune systems get beat up by that experience. And so the extended stress that we can get exposed to because of that 3-month-long sugar and stress party, our immune systems are not working as well as it should. And then there's another factor that has to do with this, and this happens to be where you live. And I'm not talking about city versus county or country. Obviously there may be different stresses that we're exposed to if we live in an urban versus a suburban, maybe not. But where you live in the world in regard to how much sunshine you get plays a very important role with this. And this comes over to the issue of what your vitamin D levels are. And this is why this is one of your easiest, most inexpensive tools that you can use to avoid and treat the flu if you do happen to get it, and that is your vitamin D and vitamin D levels. And again, future webinar, I think next month, is about vitamin D, and we'll get much more into how vitamin D works in your body and why it's so important for many, many different things. There's all sorts of health benefits that come along with vitamin D. It's good for your bones, you know that. It's good for your heart. It's also very good for your immune system, and that's why we'll talk about it today. So where you live plays a very important role as to your susceptibility of and to the flu. So here's a little fact for you. Did you know that they really don't get a flu season along the equator? And the reason is because you get exposure to sun, the proper kind of sunlight at the proper time of day that makes vitamin D. So if it's the middle of the summer and you're out in the sun and you're getting some exposure to the sun over, an extended period of time, not just 10 or 15 minutes, but 40, 45 minutes or whatever, your body will make about 10,000 units of vitamin D. Now here's the kicker though. Number one, you have to be exposed to the proper sunlight. It has to be at a certain level in the sky. So those of us that live in Baltimore right now, this time of year, I don't care how much sun you get at what time during the day, that whole shadow thing, you're not making any vitamin D from it. And so, and that line is further or closer to the equator than I was led to believe always. And so this time of year, if you're anywhere north of like Atlanta, Georgia, then you're not really making any vitamin D. And so it's important to understand that we have to get our vitamin D from some other way. Now, how much vitamin D do you need? Well, I'll talk about that in a second. There are different forms of vitamin D. There's vitamin D2 that's also called ergocalciferol, and that is the synthetic vitamin D. The natural vitamin D is called vitamin D3, also known as cholecalciferol. And the only difference between the two is not in toxicity, it's just in how your body would use it. Your body uses natural vitamin D or vitamin D3 much more effectively than it does the synthetic. I don't know if anyone out there has ever had their doctor write them a prescription for vitamin D, where they're concerned about your vitamin D levels and they write you a prescription where you take 50,000 units once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever. That actually is the synthetic vitamin D. So it just doesn't, your body just doesn't use it as efficiently. So where would you get vitamin D from? So we talked about sunlight, and it's important to understand that that's really how the body was intended to get vitamin D, was exposure to the sun. So I just wrote this up here. What are food sources of vitamin D? Salmon and certain other seafood, fortified orange juice, milk, and yogurt, which are also fortified, meaning that the vitamin D is added back to it. I just want to read you how much you're getting from that so you have a sense that it really is very hard to get it from your diet. So if you're having some, maybe a nice 3.5 ounce piece of cooked salmon, you get a whopping 360 units of vitamin D. If you're having sardines, like a 2 ounce little can of sardines, it gives you 250 units. Fortified OJ, 140 units. Fortified milk, 98 units. That's per cup. If you're having some yogurt, 6 ounces, only 80 units. And so, as you can see, hopefully, that is not a lot of vitamin D, and it's really hard to get enough vitamin D from food, And when you talk about things that are fortified, usually they're fortified with the synthetic form, which means your body uses it less appropriately anyways. And so comes to supplementation. What's the best way to get it? You just get it from simple supplements. I love vitamin D for so many reasons. And again, in next month's webinar, we're going to talk about this in much more detail and why it truly is one of those genetic controlling nutrients that plays a role with all sorts of chronic disease. The best way to get it is through a supplement. It is not very expensive. And this time of year, I'm a very big proponent of getting really aggressive dosages of vitamin D. I take 5,000 units every day, and I recommend somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 units every day for most people. Now, there's a way to know how much is right for you, and I'll talk about that in a second. I also just want to mention that the RDA of vitamin D is like 400, 600 international units. And the RDA, which supposedly stands for Recommended Daily Allowances, I like to tell people that really what it means is ridiculous dietary assumptions. The RDA of vitamin D, or the RDA of any nutrient, is the amount that you need to avoid getting the deficiency of that nutrient. And that means the clinical deficiency of that nutrient. And so the official deficiency of vitamin D is called rickets, and you need 600 units or so of vitamin D every day to avoid getting rickets. But what we're learning in science is that there are, I guess, what we would consider to be different degrees of a deficiency of a nutrient. And so with vitamin D, a lot of people who get autoimmune diseases, who get cardiovascular disease, who have immune dysfunctions, which show up as all sorts of things, including many kinds of cancer, depression, and of course osteoporosis. People that get those, I would consider that to be an issue with vitamin D, meaning that would be a vitamin D deficiency. So that's not how the government looks at it as far as determining the RDAs. The RDA is how much you need to avoid getting rickets, and I'd say that you need much higher amounts to avoid getting all of those other things that we just talked about. And again, I'm not making this up. This is, there's hard scientific evidence to support that. So how much vitamin D should you have for prevention and for treatment? And I'll talk about this a little bit more a little bit later today as well. But just want to mention that really the best way to know for sure is to know what your vitamin D level is. You should have that checked. And just like you go to the doctor wants to do that regular blood test where he sees what your cholesterol is and your sugar is. I think it's more important to know what your vitamin D level is than any of that other stuff. And so this should be done routinely. Now, you can go to your doctor and you can say, hey, what's my vitamin D level? And the doctor may say, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's check it. Or the doctor may say, you don't need to know that. And my recommendation is to say, well, yeah, actually, I do need to know that. It's very important. Some doctors will say, okay, fine, we'll do it. Other doctors will get stubborn and say, hey, I'm the doctor. Don't tell me what to do. And so you have a couple choices. You can go find another doctor who actually wants to do what you want to do and wants to listen to you and where your sensibilities are. Or if you want, you can just get your vitamin D level checked a different way. We actually have a kit that we sell that you can do this test at home. So you do a little finger prick, you put some blood on some spots, it gets sent off. I get the results, and then I go over those results with you so you can know what your vitamin D level is. And the cost on that, I don't know, it's not very expensive, $65, $70, something like that. And so if that's something that you wanted to check and you can't get your doctor to do it and or your insurance to pay for it, I'm happy to help you out with that. All you have to do is call or email me about that. But I think it's important to know what your vitamin D level is, because then we can properly dose you to give you the maximum protection as you go through the cough and cold and the flu season. So what is a normal blood level? That's another good question. And it's important to understand that the way that the labs give you their range, like if you go to the, you get a blood test, vitamin D level test, and you get your results, you'll see that it'll give you a range of what's normal. And it'll say anywhere from 30 to 100 or 28 to 100. And it depends on which lab you go to, Quest or LabCorp or whatever. Now, the way that the labs get those ranges is basically just a bell-shaped curve of everybody that they test. So understand that for the last 40 years, we are walking, talking shade. We have been scared away from getting proper exposure to the sun. And what that means is that most of us are walking around with low levels of vitamin D. And if that's the case, then the reference ranges are going to be low because everybody that a particular lab is testing has a tendency to be low. And so even though the blood test, and your doctor may tell you if your blood, if your blood level of vitamin D is 32 or 34, that's good and that's normal. I'm here telling you it is not, and there is hard scientific evidence supporting this. And so we want that range to be more in the 50 to 60 range. And so that's where we talk about supplementation. And it may take some aggressive supplementation at first to really get that level up. And there can be individual variations between how somebody will use and absorb vitamin D products. And so, if you have a little excess body fat, that vitamin D is going to have a tendency to be stored before you can get blood levels elevated. And so you may need to be a little bit more aggressive. And again, keep in mind that if you were to go out and go into the sun and get exposure properly, you'd make about 10,000 units a day. And so we're very comfortable saying that anywhere up to 10,000 units a day is fine as far as supplementation goes. And you almost have to try to hurt yourself to get toxic from vitamin D. And I mean literally, you have to make a concerted effort. The only really reported case in the medical literature of somebody that it's verifiable that it was, that their problems were from too much vitamin D. It was a guy who was taking 250,000 units every single day for months before he started to show toxicity to it. So very safe, very effective. So my next question to you all is, and to the public, the general public, is how dangerous is really getting the flu anyways? What do we hear in the media? What you want to look at is a table that shows you pneumonia and influenza, number of deaths from all of these years. Now you'll notice that what I just said was pneumonia and influenza, because those are the statistics that you hear all of these talking heads put out there. It's not just influenza that they're giving you those numbers. They're saying pneumonia and influenza. So here's a slide coming up that will show you the actual numbers of the real dangers, the deaths that are attributable to these things. Sorry, our fancy slides are coming up just a tad slow. So what they report as deaths is pneumonia and influenza together. And as you can see there, these numbers for 2003 is around 65,000 people. For 2004, it was almost 60,000. 2005, a little over 63,000 people. And that's usually the average. As I look at the statistics here, if I go through from 79 to 2005, which is where they have the stats for, it's usually anywhere between 45,000 and 90,000 people that die. of pneumonia and influenza. What you have to understand is that the vast majority of those people are actually dying from pneumonia, not from the flu. What are the deaths because of the flu alone? Well, you can see them there. At 2003, there were, close to 1,800 people. 2004, 1,100 people. 2005, 1,800 people. And interestingly, if I look at the numbers from 79 to 2005, if I look at those numbers, they're pretty consistent, which really brings up a point in my mind. If those deaths due to influenza have been consistent, isn't that sort of evidence that the whole vaccination campaign isn't really necessarily doing anything and or protecting people? Because certainly in 79, which was the year I graduated high school, you were not pushed as hard to get the flu shot as you are today. And so if the numbers have been pretty consistent throughout that time, then it seems to me that it's kind of evidence that what we're doing doesn't really, isn't really useful, or at least the flu shot. So here's another question for you, and another slide that's coming up that says, what are the real dangers of getting the flu in the first place? If the scare tactics are telling us that, well, if you get the flu, you're going to die, or you have a reasonable chance to die, blah, 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 then what are the real dangers of getting the flu? So obviously the first one's being uncomfortable. We all know that. There's nobody here that's listening today that hasn't gotten the flu, that doesn't understand the body aches, the headache, the fever, the cough and cold symptoms, all that sort of stuff. And so obviously that's one of the dangers of getting the flu. Missing work, that's another thing, and I guess depending on what side you are of the table there, maybe missing work isn't such a terrible thing. And honestly, taking care of yourself if you're not feeling great is a good idea, and I do recommend that. There's also the risk of making other people sick. But I will point out again, and I don't care who you are, I don't care where you live, unless you're in a bubble somewhere, you are getting exposed to the flu virus. It just is a possibility. And the last thing I'd like to say is that, well, maybe one of the quote-unquote dangers here, and maybe it isn't really a danger, obviously I say that tongue-in-cheek, is you get some exercise for your immune system. Or those of us who believe that by getting a flu every so often, it actually is keeping the troops being able to do what they do and preparing them to have bigger battles. And there are some of us who think that if you do prevent yourself from getting the flu, even though the flu vaccine isn't necessarily so effective at doing that, that maybe you're not preparing yourself to have bigger battles down the road. And I know for sure that there are some interesting changes in our health as we get older and as we go down this road of doing medicine the way that we're doing. And maybe the whole vaccination program is playing a role with this and we're not realizing it. I know for sure that growing up, I did not see the same numbers of people. It wasn't as prevalent for people to have all sorts of autoimmune diseases like MS or rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. And today it's much more commonplace. And I really think that those of us that are baby boomers, we're the ones that are have been exposed to vaccines our entire lives, and I think that has played a role with that. So anyways, the other thing the question I really want to ask is, does the vaccination program that we have really even work? And so I'd like to point out to you how vaccines are made and how it's determined which virus or viruses the vaccine is going to be made for each year. And it's kind of an interesting story, and most people that I know don't know the story, so I'll just share it with you real quick. A couple people from them, the government, the officials, the CDC, whatever, in early part of the year, January or so, they go to Asia, and they sort of look around and they scientifically try to determine which flu is going around there, because the assumption is that's the flu that we're going to get. The flus sort of travel from continent to continent, and they make it to us sometime in the fall, but it takes a while to make up the vaccine, and so they have to try to make a determination beforehand about which viruses, which actual influenza virus variants or strains are going to be the ones that we're going to be exposed to. And so they try to make that determination, then they come back here and they share that information, and vaccines are made. And usually the flu vaccine contains 3 different viruses or influenza viral strains, and oftentimes they miss the mark, or they're not as exact as you would hope they would be with the vaccination. So there are times that they've been right on and they've made the right vaccine for the right flu, and oftentimes that they haven't, or that they've had mixed results. And it's really funny, if you go to the CDC website and you read about the flu, they talk about this, and they say, but even if we've guessed wrong, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but basically what they say is, even if we've guessed wrong, we still think it's a good idea for you to get the flu shot, because you may get some protection from something else. And that just doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense scientifically, and common sense, it doesn't make any sense at all. So anyways, that's the way that the flu vaccine is sort of determined. Now, what do the studies say for the effectiveness of the flu vaccine? And I want to point out, and again, I am a big fan of all of us really educating ourselves, being skeptical about the information that we hear, including what you're hearing from me today. I don't want you all to be sheeple. I don't want you to listen to what they say on TV or what comes out of the CDC or from your doctor's mouth. And I don't necessarily want you to listen to what you hear from me either without doing your own exploration and finding out your own information. I think that that's really, really important. And so there's a place that I will refer you to that is called the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews. And this is an international organization that is not funded by anybody within the pharmaceutical or government industry, really, that just looks at studies from a scientific perspective from all over the place, all over the world, studies. They look at those studies and they say, wait a second, scientifically the conclusion that was made on this study wasn't valid, or the conclusion in this one was valid, and they give the reasons why and everything. And then they put all of these studies together, and then they make conclusions from it. And according to the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews, and again, I encourage you to get on Google, do a search for Cochrane Database, and go through it and do your own searches. In elderly, in infants, in children with asthma, in adults, in the general population, the scientific data that is out there does not support the idea that vaccinations do anything to protect anybody. That's the bottom line in it all. And so I would encourage you to go out and do your own exploration about that and come to understand. And I'm not even talking about the potential dangers of getting a vaccination. I'm just talking about whether it works or not, whether it's just a big old wasted time and energy and ultimately money. What does the doctor want to do for antiviral treatments? You know, if you do happen to get the flu, what the doctor wants to do is write a prescription for one of the prescription antivirals, and there's a few that are on the market. There's an older one that's called amantadine, and then there's some newer ones. And I just wanted to mention real quick, because we're talking about the flu, and you know, maybe if you do get sick and you're really uncomfortable and you go to the doctor's going to want to throw you on one of these medicines. And so what are the effects, and what are the potential unwanted effects of taking some of these medicines? Not just you, but everyone who's been taking it before you. Okay, so are they effective? If you look at the studies and even the information that comes from the manufacturers that make these antivirals, and they're very expensive, you take them, if it does help you, you're likely to suffer from flu symptoms less than a day less than you normally would. So if you're going to get the flu and you're going to have symptoms for 6 or 7 days, you might have it for 5 or 6 days instead. That's all the effectiveness that you can get from it. What are the unwanted effects? Well, there's this thing that's called resistance. And when the whole viral community out there gets exposure to these antivirals, they genetically start to make differences in themselves so that those antivirals become less and less effective. And some of the studies that I've seen as I look at this talk about that older drug, amantadine, that really there could be an 80 or 85% in the public resistance to that medicine. And you know, so then there becomes a concern, well, what happens if something really wacky happens, like there's a really bad flu out there that people really need protection to, or some other sort of viral thing, and this has already been out there, and those little viruses start to become resistant to it. Then we have less real tricks in our arsenal to take care of it. So just a general concern there with these antivirals. And so let's talk a little bit about prevention and treatment then. I know, that's the real nuts of it. I made you wait 40 minutes to get to the good part of it anyway. So, wow, look at my, sorry, my cursor was going a little crazy on the screen there. Okay, so prevention and treatment. Okay, for prevention, there's a couple things. As you guys can guess, there's vitamin D, and it is really, really important. I can't stress enough. It's really, really important to get that vitamin D level elevated. And it's good to know what that vitamin D level is, and even if you don't know what it is, it would be fair to assume that your level is low if you're not supplementing. And again, it just has to do with what we think about the sun and how we don't get exposure to the sun like we were supposed to. Let me just say a quick word about that because it's important to understand. I am not advocating you do what I did when I was a teenager, and that's go down to Ocean City, Maryland, put baby oil on, and then baste in the sun for 4 or 5 hours. That wasn't healthy sun exposure. That was overexposure, and then, of course, for the next 5 days I was beet red, and we've all had that experience. But you do need proper exposure to the sun. You know what happens when you get incremental exposure to the sun in moderate amounts? You start to tan. That's the body's mechanism to help protect you from getting too much sun. I have done and seen a lot of testing of vitamin D in my patients and people that have called and asked me questions. And I can tell you, without a doubt, I can only think of 2 or 3 patients, 2 or 3 people that didn't supplement with vitamin D that had what I consider to be adequate vitamin D levels. And I'm talking about, that's thousands of people getting tested. I've only seen a few who actually had adequate vitamin D levels. And so the vast majority of us, it's absolutely safe to start taking right now 5,000 units of vitamin D every day. If you're a little hinky about that, if you're unsure, start to do some research. I would encourage you to go to a website. Just do a Google search for Vitamin D Council. And you'll read all about how safe vitamin D is, how much you have to take to get toxic, and what is typical dosages these days. There's another website or another Google search I'll tell you to do, and that's Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, just like it sounds, Tenpenny. And this is a physician that it does a lot of writing and information about vaccinations in general, including the flu vaccine and vitamin D and blah blah blah. We've had her as a guest on our radio show in the past. She's really good, and I really like her information. And you also, after reading that information, will become much more comfortable with the idea of taking a lot of vitamin D. So 5,000 units a day, every day. Even if you've never had a blood level checked, start taking that. You can get that level checked if you want, but I can tell you that it's completely safe and be no problem. There are also a couple of homeopathic remedies that also can be used as prevention of the flu. One of them is called oxalococcinum. Now, this is a homeopathic remedy that is actually made from the duck liver because it's theorized that how the virus gets transferred from continent to continent is actually with the duck. And so this is made out of duck liver, and it's just a general sort of minor exposure. You can almost think of it as like kind of like a homeopathic vaccine almost. These are little tiny pellets, and if you take 3 or 4 of them at the beginning of each month as you go through the cough and cold season, oftentimes that will protect you from never getting the flu. If you do get the flu, this will come in the treatment part, but you could actually use higher doses of that to treat it. So that's an old standby, and you'll see information about that everywhere. That's been used for years and years. There's another homeopathic remedy, which is called influenzanum, and that's sort of the same idea, but it's actually made from the flu vaccine each year. And that also seems to be able to afford you some protection and you use it the same way. What about treatment? What about if you do happen to get sick? Well, again, first thing I would tell you is vitamin D. And if you started with that very first symptom of feeling like you're getting the cold or flu, or even if you know that you were at that party and you got exposed to somebody who has the flu, and you didn't just look at them, but you gave them a hug or whatever, or shook their hand, start taking higher doses of vitamin D. At the very first sign of having symptoms of the flu, or any sort of cough and cold, start taking higher doses of vitamin D. What am I talking about? 25,000 units if you're just a normal, healthy, functioning adult, 25,000 units every morning. And you do that for 2 or 3 mornings, and I promise you, if you do end up getting the flu, it'll be much less severe than it would have been, and many times you will end up just cutting it off right then and there and never getting sick. And that's a really good way to do it, and I will tell you I do that regularly. I wake up in the morning, and it's like you feel the sniffles and that little headache and the cough or whatever. You take 25,000 units of vitamin D. Vitamin D in capsules will come in all sorts of sizes these days now. You can find it in 400 units, that's like the old RDA thing, but we have it in 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. It's available up to 50,000 units per capsule. And it also comes in drops. And so this is good for children. It's good for people that don't like to swallow pills, although these are small pills and generally not a problem to swallow. Okay, so that's for treatment. Zinc, and we've all heard about the zinc lozenges, the Coldies, which basically are zinc lozenges. Zinc is very cool because it sort of sets up a barrier that stops viruses from being able to invade other cells. And so when you use a lozenge that you're sucking on, it specifically helps with those upper respiratory cells. And that's how a virus works. I don't know if you guys know this and how it spreads, but basically a virus will infiltrate into a cell, and then it'll kind of hijack the DNA material, that's the reproduction material, and then it'll reproduce itself until that cell explodes, and then you've got a whole bunch of little viruses that go around and get into other cells. That's the way the virus will proliferate within our body. And so anything that helps stop getting those viruses being allowed to get into the cell will help stop the spread and ultimately help you from getting the flu or treating the flu if you get it. There's all sorts of herbs and glandulars that we use. There's a couple in particular that I highlighted here because I like them a lot. The first one is called Immunity Take Care by a company called New Chapter. This is an elderberry product and has been shown to set up a blockade to prevent viruses from being able to get into the cells. They used to actually call the product blockade when it first hit the market a couple years ago, and then the FDA came to them and said, no, that sounds like you're making a medical claim. You can't do that. So they had to change it. But it actually does set up a blockade. I'll tell you that. It's clear. It's easy. You could just take one of these every morning before you went to school, and it would offer you some protection as you go through the season. And if you do get sick, it'll help stop the spread from you to you and from you to other people as well. Really like that product, Immunity Take Care. There are a couple of herbal and glandular products by a company called Standard Process. Herbal products like Antivirals are really good at helping with boosting the immune system short term for some sort of assault like a virus or a flu. Congoplex is a group of glandulars, including thymus gland, and thymus is in the middle of your chest, and that is that's sort of like immune central. That's like a key regulator for your immune system working the way it's supposed to. Supporting that by taking actual thymus gland is very helpful. And so I've had a lot of good clinical experience with using those two products, Antivirals and Congoplex, in very aggressive dosages at the very beginning of getting sick. And again, it just really does a good job of cutting it off. And so those two things, Immunity Take Care and those other two products, Antivirals and Congoplex, are three things that I like to have in the arsenal at home, as well as some vitamin D. I like the 5,000 unit capsule so you can take it daily, and then if you do get sick, take higher dosages. To have them at home right now before you get sick, because you know what happens. If you catch this earlier, you're going to have a better success rate. So if you wake up in the morning and you've got that little and that little headache, or that you're starting to get sick, you know how it is. It'll be another day or two before you get that stuff to start taking. But if you have it home now, then you can start taking it immediately, and you will be much more successful at that. Okay, so I also wanted to just put out there that now is a good time to type in any questions into your little question box, and then I'll be able to see them and address them as we go through this. We've got a few minutes left in the webinar, and so I'll start to address those questions in a second. So if you look on that next screen that's about to come up, you'll see what else we have going on. In November, we will be talking about vitamin D in much more detail, not just in relation to immune function, but also, as I said, cardiovascular, bone structure. There's a lot of good studies showing the vitamin D working well with all sorts of cancers or having your levels up higher. And then in December, we're going to talk about stress and how it affects us and how to change that as well. So good to start seeing your questions if you put them up there. Also want to just reiterate that everybody here is welcome to call me in the office anytime you'd like, or you can email me. If you go to the website wellbeinggps.com, that is your navigation tool to being well, You can email me right from there, or you can call me. I am here to act as a resource for you guys as your health is concerned. Okay, so first question was, what amount of vitamin D for an 8-year-old for prevention and treatment? Okay, good question. So the 8-year-old, again, and there's a lot of information out there about, from different sources about what's appropriate for prevention. If you look at Dr. Tenpenny's information for prevention for 5 to 12-year-olds, you'd want 3,000 to 4,000 units a day. So I think anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 units a day is reasonable. For treatment, at first sign of illness, she says 50,000 units a day. I never did that with my kids. I would give them 20,000 units at that age, though, and I can tell you that when I started doing that, they missed much less school than they did before we started using vitamin D. So that would be pretty typical. Okay, so that question was from Marie, and I thank you for that, Marie. Let's see, what else? A question about elderberry for treatment for adults and children. You mean how much or whether it's good or not? It is very good, and that's what that Immunity Take Care product is. It's a very specific treatment of the elderberry herb to get the more benefit out of it. And there have been some pretty hardcore studies showing that this very scientific way that they have of extracting the active ingredients from herbs is different than other companies. And so there are elderberry products out there. There's elderberry, cough and cold things that you can find, and they may be very effective. I just know that scientifically, the new Chakra product, Immunity Take Care, has been shown to be more effective, and so that's the one that I have a tendency to rely on. Honestly, it's a little bit more expensive. There's no question about that, but it is an excellent product. I've got a lot of practical experience with it, as well as experience with a lot of my patients who get excellent results with it. And again, I will tell you that that elderberry product is great to use for prevention as well. It's not just about treatment. If you find yourself going into a situation where you know you're going to be exposed, if you stuck on one of those things before, you will be a little bit more protected in that situation than if not. And I've got some patients that are teachers that would get sick every year at some point when their kids would get sick, and when they do this, they end up not getting sick. So two things again, the elderberry and getting those vitamin D levels elevated. So I don't see that anyone else has any specific questions coming in, and so I will take the opportunity to do a couple things. Number one, thank you very much for your attention and your participation in this. I really do appreciate it. I would love your feedback. We are constantly looking to improve the way we do this. We want to make this information available to everybody as much as we can. These webinars are being recorded and will show up on the website archived, so that if this was useful for you and you want to share it for somebody else, you'll be able to tell them to get to the website, and they'll be able to listen to it and see the whole display at their leisure. And we've got more of them coming up. Again, in November, specifically about vitamin D, and in December about stress, and then before the December one, you will see our schedule for the next 6 months. We're pretty aggressive with this. Looks like one more question's coming in. Any hindrances to vitamin D absorption? Yes, there can be. The source of vitamin D for practically every product on the market actually comes from lanolin. And so, that's the oil on the skin of sheep. And so there's a chemical process where the vitamin D is extracted from that. Sometimes people can have an allergy to lanolin or sheep, and so that could make that a problem. The biggest hindrance is the amount of body fat that you have. The more body fat you have, because vitamin D is a fat-soluble and a fat-stored nutrient, if you have a lot of body fat, you taking vitamin D, the body's going to try to store that, which then can be a hindrance to getting your blood levels elevated, and that's what you really need. And so excess body fat translates into sometimes needing higher amounts of vitamin D as far as supplementation goes. And the way to know for sure is to get those blood tests done so that you can know that you're that you're attaining the level that you're looking for. And again, in that 50 to 60 to 70 range is really what we're shooting for. So everybody, wow, this has been really good. That is an hour that went fast. I really appreciate it. Your feedback would be appreciated as well. Sharing the information would be appreciated, and don't hesitate to call me. And Cheryl, I think that's it. I don't know if we have anything else to discuss here. I look forward to seeing everybody in November. You guys take care.